accomplished wet blankets can burst any celebratory balloon. The wedding was so beautiful, such a shame that the groom couldn't have lost a few pounds for the occasion. Or, congratulations on your new promotion, but you've still got an awful lot of the ladder to climb, don't you? Or, the new church hall looks wonderful. Of course, we'll probably never grow enough to fill it or pay for it. Deflating joy, tarnishing triumphs, that's what wet blankets do best. As a psychologist, Les Parrott says that he knows plenty of good people who gave in to the negativism of wet blankets at work until they had internalised every pessimistic message to the point of becoming depressed. Thankfully, he has also seen plenty of these same people learn to cope with wet blankets' negative messages and rise to unimagined heights. Keep watching to find out their secret. Wet blankets are automatically negative about whatever makes you excited. They tend to be cynical, pessimistic, discounting, deflating, fault-finding, melancholy, stagnant, rejecting, and contaminating. Some people use pessimism as a defense. They're at their best when they focus on the negative. If they shoot down an idea before it gets off the ground, then they don't have to worry about its possible failure. They need to complain and lower everyone's expectations. They paint the worst case scenario and then work to keep the worst case from happening, thus harnessing their anxiety as a motivator to do better than expected. Most deep negativism is not inborn, it's learned from parents, teachers, and sports coaches, for example. For instance, some people's parents may have had a very gloomy view of life, and that gloominess became contagious. Some people may have even learned to be negative from experiencing a devastating failure, in their eyes, such as not getting into the university of choice. They may see themselves as damaged goods and believe that no one around them deserves success or happiness. And research has shown that at the core of every wet blankets problem is a basic struggle with low self-esteem. In a vain attempt to feel better about themselves, they indiscriminately knock down other people's ideas and aspirations. So how do we cope with wet blankets? Firstly, face the wet blanket within. Recently, Barry suggested going to a restaurant other than Shooker's, our local curry house, to celebrate a family birthday. But we always go to Shooker's to celebrate family birthdays, was my immediate response. I have the feeling that I'm not alone. Everyone at some point has fallen in line with the wet blanket brigade and has said it will never work. After all, it doesn't take much effort to lack vision. Negativism is easy. And when you understand this part of yourself, you'll better understand the wet blankets in your life. Number 2, guard against infection. The wet blanket virus is highly contagious. If we're open to both positive and negative stuff that flows in. And if we try to filter out the latter, the former unfortunately gets blocked too. So when we are around a negative person, we become negative too. So we must learn to be objective and observe wet blankets' feelings without getting infected by them. Number 3, it's important not to confuse critical thinking with negativism. Critical thinkers identify possible disasters and can help you plan ways to evade or overcome or minimise them. In practice, it is fairly easy to tell those two apart. In response to a statement such as, "But if we submit an application, it will mean sacrificing some other project," the critical thinker will say, "That's a good point, but we may be able to find some way around that problem. Or maybe we could manage with one less project." Wet blankets would hear the same statement and reply, "You're right, there's nothing we can do." Number 4, wet blankets should be the last people anyone consults for advice unless they want to be discouraged. Instead, seek wisdom and guidance from people who are known for their optimistic spirit and reality-based perspectives. These are the people who will give wings to your ideas. And number 5, monitor your inner voice. If you live or work with wet blankets, you have almost certainly had your self-confidence taken down a few notches, so you do need to pay attention to your self-talk. What mental tape do you play when you make a mistake? What do you hear in your head when you don't reach your goal? If you are not aware of the messages you give yourself, Carry around a notepad and record your inner voice. Just jot down what goes through your mind when you have a new idea or don't follow through on a goal that you've already set for yourself. If you find that wet blankets have had a bigger impact than you thought, it's not too late. Simply continue to monitor your messages and begin to replace them with realistic messages. So don't mistake this for positive thinking or happy affirmations, or even worse, self-delusion. The point is not to tell yourself you can be a world-class artist if you can't draw a straight line. The point is to correct flawed, overgeneralized thinking, such as, I can't do anything right. Remember that self-talk, both positive and negative, has a way of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's why it's so important to monitor your negative messages and counter negativism with realism. There are some other things suggested in the workbook, and if we get the chance, we can talk about those when we meet together. There have always been wet blankets throughout history, and maybe it was because of them that St. Paul wrote, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I say again, rejoice." A key thing to remember when dealing with a wet blanket is don't let people dictate your mood. We can't cover every one of the impossible people types on this course, but do take a moment to look at the videos on dealing with the critic, the steamroller and the sponge on the website.